Chapter 44. The Beast's Shadow. Kennelly was asleep. No evil on its own, Cass reflected, and certainly the elder could not be blamed for taking rest when time allowed for it. Still, in this one specific instance, as Cass stood at the entrance to the elder's roost with his two guests, he could not help reflecting that a more energetic, not younger, just more energetic, elder would have lent this meeting the sort of gravitas that it deserved. Nothing for it, thought he. Cass inclined his head to Zelda and Paya.
Give me just a moment and I will rouse Kennelly.
Two very different looks flashed across Paya and Zelda's faces. Hylian and Shake expressions were not much like Rito expressions, but after years in his teacher's service he could read them easily enough. Paya was shocked, though not quite affronted, that they would need to disturb the rest of a venerated elder. Zelda's was more difficult, more analytical, as her brow knit and she scowled.
Will that be necessary?
Zelda's tone was soft and lilting, not quieter than usual but gentler. She would have made an excellent singer.
We would not want to waste the elder's time and interrupt him. Besides...
Looking at her, Cass thought that Zelda seemed very young, and she was intensely and mindfully thoughtful in the way that the very young could sometimes be. What a warm feeling, to be confronted with the earnestness that his own daughters might show in the years ahead.
It is a shame, but I think it best to wake him. Whatever we decide should pass by the elder, in any case, and he has more experience in dealing with difficult questions than anyone in the village.
Well, save you, of course. That resolved, Cass stepped into the center of the room, taking in Kennelly. The elder of the village certainly looked the part. He was nearly as large as he was old, and his sense of size was enhanced by his snowy, carefully braided beard. His beak was a point of darkness in that field of white, and it was difficult to draw the line between his beard, his brow, and his hair. He reclined in a massive rocking chair, and as he slept he seemed to have closed out the entire world. Cass knew Kennelly well. Of course, already old when Cass was born, Kennelly had always been present. For all that he played up the image to the contrary, the village elder's senses were still sharp. Cass cleared his throat. Kennelly opened one enormous eye, which took a moment to focus on his guest and another to register who it was.
"Oh, ass,"
the elder said, shifting in his chair so that his posture was straighter.
"What brings you here, my boy? Where is?"
Whatever Kennelly had been about to ask died in his mouth as his eyes found Zelda and Paya. The young woman would not be able to recognize the way that his pupils dilated, how his eyes shifted focus to take in every detail of them without needing to dart from spot to spot, but Kennelly's concentration was obvious to Cass. Yes, the old man was still sharp, and could be much sharper when he wanted to be.
"Elder,"
Cass said,
"I would like to introduce Zelda and Paya."
The girls bowed very formally. Kennelly did not bow in return, he did not even nod, he stared.
"Do my eyes deceive me?"
Kennelly said.
"Or is that a shake slate on your hip?"
Zelda stared for a moment, uncomprehending, and then looked down at the device she wore.
"Yes, it is. Do you recognize it, elder?"
"I do," Kennelly said, only showing his mounting excitement in the way his talons danced on the floor.
"The shake slates are like the divine beasts, only held by those who have been marked as champions, worthy of their place in the fight against the calamity. To see you carrying one, to see it activated, you must be."
And then, just as it had been picking up speed, the thought crashed in a way that was written across Kennelly's face. He said, more to himself than to the room,
"Wait, what am I saying? The champions all died a century ago. There's no way that one of them made their way here."
He shook his broad head, then turned his attention more fully to Zelda.
"Tell me, are you descended from one of the champions?"
Well, all things considered, it was as good a guess as could be made. In spite of his role as a storyteller, Cass did not actually enjoy telling other people's stories on their behalf. Every story was better told by the heart that had experienced it, by the mind that had categorized it and committed it to memory. The last few years of his teacher's life, Cass had spent a great deal of time arguing with the old bard about what stories should or should not be told, especially when those actors were still living. The two of them had never seen quite eye to eye, especially with regards to the ballads that the old master had written about Zelda. Still, seeing Zelda weighing the options, anticipating how much more complicated the conversation would be when the whole truth came out, Cass prepared to reach outside the remit of his own storytelling. As he drew breath to speak, the long-lost princess of Hyrule said,
"I am not descended from one of the champions. No. Rather, I trace my ancestry to the royal family of Hyrule.
Cass could not suppress the thrill he felt. Perfect. Not even a lie, but it hides the worst parts of the truth, the inconvenient parts. He thought perhaps Paya would have been likewise impressed, but the Sheikah woman's eyes only widened, almost imperceptibly. For his part, Keenelly's excitement abated not at all. If anything, it seemed to flare up, his talons audibly scraping against the floor.
Incredible,
the elder said.
To think that a descendant of that house should have survived the calamity, and with the Sheikh slate there can be no doubt as to your claim. A princess, no less. And I ask this of a princess. That runs counter to all propriety. But, at the same time, what choice do I have?
The elder got to his feet, placed his wings behind his back, and bowed to Zelda.
Descendant of the royal family, please forgive me this impertinence, but on behalf of all the Rito I must request your help.
Zelda returned his bow.
I have come to offer that very help, honored elder.
Keenelly straightened only when Zelda did, and for all the strain that the motion must have put on his back he looked enormously, almost deliriously happy.
Thank you. In that case, I will be frank, the divine beast, Vah Medoh, represents a danger to the Rito. It patrols our skies like a jealous tyrant, unleashing terrible weapons against anyone who climbs too high. As a result, our people have been earthbound for the first time in a very long while. There are those among our people who are restless beneath the yoke of Vah Medoh's threat, and have even sought to do battle with it. It will not be long before one of them is permanently injured, or worse. It is said that only a champion may tame a divine beast, but one who carries the blood of the royal family, like the princess of a century ago, must also have the same power. There are no champions left after the calamity returned, and so I must ask that he take up this task on behalf of the fallen, board the divine beast and comet, so that our people will be free to roam the skies once more.
He bowed again, sweeping one of his wings across the floor.
You are the only hope of our people. I accept this task,
Zelda said, back straight and her hands folded in front of her, radiating the grace and poise of someone who had been born into a position that demanded such discipline.
However, though I wish it were otherwise, I cannot reach the divine beast unaided. I will need Rito expertise to carry out this mission.
Keenelly nodded, then, as if he had been anticipating this problem.
It is true that reaching Vah Medoh will be the most dangerous and most difficult portion of this entire affair. To succeed, I recommend that you seek out Tiba. As headstrong as he is the most skilled flyer among the Rito in a century, and if anyone can help you reach the divine beast, he can.
Cass said,
We've heard that Tiba and Hoth tried to reach the divine beast already. We passed by Hoth on our way here, but Tiba was nowhere to be seen.
Keenelly's expression darkened.
Yes, I suppose not. Unfortunately, I do not know where he is. I recommend asking his wife if anyone knows where he currently roosts, then she will.
Zelda and Paya bowed again. Cass inclined his head to the elder, who nodded in return. As Keenelly took his seat, Cass looked out and across the short distance to the home where Tiba and Saki were raising their son together. It was such a short distance, after all, and the air so open. He was not surprised to find that Saki was standing near the railing of her home, eyes locked on the two girls who were stepping out of the elder's residence. There was so much apprehension in her eyes, Cass thought, but maybe that apprehension was also colored by hope. Cass followed after Zelda and Paya, giving them spoken directions for the short distance to their destination. Saki met the group outside of the door to her home, visibly nervous as she waited for their arrival. Zelda had been struck by Cass's plumage. It could be said that Saki's nearly floored her. Purples and pinks flowed together in a kind of cascade that caught the light of day and suffused it across the Rito's entire body, so that she seemed almost to glow. Where most Rito wore their hair in relatively simple styles, Saki's was done in a pair of bright pink rolls that swept around the back of her head. The effect was almost aggressive in how feminine-coded it was, and suggested to Zelda that Rito concepts of gender expression may have been even more pronounced than Hylian ones.
Saki?
Cass's greeting was warm, boisterous.
How are you, my friend? You have not visited Amali and I in so long. Is Tulin still feeling shy around the girls?
It was a testament to Cass's ability to read people, to see what they needed in any given moment, that Saki's nervousness was replaced by a kind of stunned amusement.
I don't know that I would say shy, exactly. But I think you know that, too.
Then she shook her head, sending her curls bouncing, and turned to Zelda with a bow.
Anyway, forgive my intrusion, but I overheard you speaking with the elder. Is it true that you intend to help my husband in the fight against Meadow?
Zelda nodded.
Yes, though I would not say I will be helping Tiba. If we are lucky, then he won't be directly involved in the fighting at all.
That was a heady assertion, and she felt it as she said it, felt it in the widening of Saki's eyes and Cass's regard pressuring her from the side. But it was true and she stuck to it. If she had her way, then none of the Rito would need to lift a wing in the actual fighting. Saki blinked blearily, then nodded, paused, and nodded again.
Thank you. Tiba is so intent on bringing down Meadow. I fear for him. I fear for where his mind takes him, seeing the divine beast hanging in the sky. Seeing him like that, even when we must take care of Tulin, makes me feel so helpless. I am sorry I cannot offer you any more than where he has gone.
She gestured with one wing, to the northwest.
He has gone to the flight range, in Dronok's Pass at the base of the Hebra Mountains.
Cass shook his head.
I shouldn't be surprised. My apologies for bothering you, Taki. We'll bring your husband back, safe and sound.
Zelda was about to try to pick apart the language that Cass had used there, the way he had very casually inserted himself into the group that would be confronting Meadow. She was interrupted in her travels down this path, however, when Saki spoke again.
Princess!
That word was given special weight, a kind of awkward power as Saki spoke it, exactly because she was not sure if it fit. The irony of that struck Zelda, and it was bitter and strange.
I've heard rumors about what's been happening. All over Hyrule, word is spreading. You told the elder that you are the descendant of the royal family, and I'm sure that's true, but that isn't the story that's being told. The story is about a returned princess who is trying to set right the world that went wrong. About the princess. About Zelda.
She felt the weight of that story, then, as if it were a person standing in the room, watching her. As if it were Hylia's power waiting inside of her. As if it were Link, eternally patient, noble in his suffering. As if it were Paya, who loved without knowing if she should allow herself to. It was not as heavy as it would have been before. Perhaps her shoulders were stronger. She replied,
This story includes your husband coming home, Saki, regardless of the darkness that clings to his face or to his thoughts. He will return soon.
Those words were power, that promise was power. Zelda watched as that power filled Saki, swirling inside of her, and she had to fight down her own reaction to the other woman's hope. Saki bowed. Zelda and Paya and Cass stepped out. They walked to Rivali's landing. 2 paragliders and 1 pair of wings bore them across the waters, toward Dronok's Pass. Meadow turned slowly overhead, blind to the petty dramas of mortal lives. Dronok's Pass was cold, the kind of bitter, biting cold that could slice through clothing and reach down into one's bones, seizing the marrow and hardening it, turning flesh to stone and blood to crystal. Cass moved comfortably, protected by the thick insulation of his feathers, but Paya and Zelda's normal clothes had not been enough. As on Mount Lanier, they were chewing on a meal made from hot peppers and sunshrooms, the warmth of that food spreading through their bodies, fighting off the chill. The wind howled around them as they walked toward the flight range. The flight range, Zelda thought, was ill-named. It was not so much a range as it was a pit out of which gusted a perpetual updraft of such strength that its howl could be heard from a kilometer away. It must have been quite deep, she reflected, and the heat of the earth must have been very near to the surface in this region, lending a sort of amusing irony to the cold in which they now walked. Even the peppers would not have been enough, had it not been for the ruby circlet she wore, and she wondered if rubies drew their heat from the earth. Perhaps Yunobo would know. A kind of cabin stood over one edge of the flight range, old and weathered, but sturdy enough to have survived years of bitter cold and relentless winds. The trio made their slow march up to it, and simply getting out of the wind had a very refreshing effect. The gale seemed removed, less powerful, when they stepped inside of the faded walls and found a fire burning beneath a cook pot. As near as Zelda could tell, no one had actually used the pot in some time, perhaps they could, before they left. Against one wall of the cabin there was a shelf, and against that shelf stood a Rita-made swallow bow and several bundles of arrows. Zelda resisted the temptation to help herself to them. Very likely, someone else would need them more than she did. The wall looking out over the range was open, and beyond it lay a deck much like Rivali's landing. A lone figure sat on that deck, facing a flight range and tending to a bow that he was turning in his wings.
"Pardon me,"
Zelda said to his back. The warrior. She did not know why she thought warrior, but she did, and no other word fit the air that the Rito gave off. Looked over his shoulder at her. His plumage was as white as the snow outside, and he wore twin braids on either side of his face. She saw, in him, an echo of something she had once grasped and failed to understand. Yes, this was a warrior.
"Yeah?"
Tiba's response felt laconic to the point of being practiced.
"Are you Tiba?"
she asked, because it was the polite thing to say, in spite of the fact that Cass was standing by the bow and arrows, examining them for himself, and could have easily confirmed it one way or another.
"I am."
The warrior turned back to his bow.
"I'm also rather busy. You should go." "Busy making Saki sick with worry."
It was the harshest thing Zelda had heard Cass say, and even then his tone was not accusatory, he was just stating a fact as he stepped past Zelda and onto the balcony. He nodded to her, signaling that this could be left to him.
"Still aiming to fight Meadow alone, are you?"
Some part of Zelda was tired, she realized, as much as she also wanted to assert herself. She stepped back into the cover of the building, and Pi stood behind her. She waited. She expected that Cass's involvement would merit more of a reaction from Tiba than her own had. Instead, the warrior actually turned back to his bow, not even giving a dismissive grunt to acknowledge the bard. Cass left Tiba no options, taking a seat next to his taciturn compatriot and looking out over the flight range. After a moment's silence,
"I don't come here enough." "You've never trained here,"
Tiba responded.
"Nor do I need to."
Cass shook his head.
"No, you misunderstand. I'm not saying that I should be here, polishing up my martial skills for the preservation of the village against potential threats, or concrete ones,"
he said as he gestured at Meadow in the distance.
"That's what people like you are for. What I mean is that there is history here, layered on every stone as if it were paint, growing richer in the wind and the sun rather than fading. There are stories here, soaked into the stone and carried on the air, and it is those that I should concern myself with."
There was a moment where Zelda thought that Tiba would not react to that, either, but the moment passed, and the warrior looked up from his bow, first at Meadow and then at Cass.
"That is foolish."
"Foolish?" Cass said, urging his friend on, for surely they were friends, Zelda thought.
"Foolish,"
Tiba agreed.
"You concern yourself with trifles, and histories, and poetry. But the world is all around us, Cass. The world is up there."
He gestured with his wing toward the divine beast.
"The world cares very little for your stories, and if we wish to address it on its terms then we have to act, not talk."
Back to his bow, though the motion of his wingtips was somewhat more restrained, more hesitant.
"There's nothing to be gained from looking to the past." "From looking to Rivali, you mean?"
Tiba scoffed, harsh and dismissive.
"If he were here now I would beg him for his help, but he isn't. He died like all the other champions. And I'm sure that, in the same situation, he would die again."
A shock of real, animal anger ran through Zelda at that, but she didn't act on it even though the pressure of it shoved against the inside of her chest. Cass's tone was very gentle.
"Do you think that you will fare any better, my friend?"
Tiba did not answer. He kept examining his bow, even though there could not possibly be any aspect of it that bore further scrutiny. Cass sighed, staring out over the flight range, and the wind howled. He was quiet for half a minute. Then,
"Saki thinks that you mean to die, you know."
Tiba raised his head once more, his eyes watchful and soft.
"She doesn't say it out loud, of course. She fears that speaking the idea will make it real. But you can see it in her eyes. When she looks toward the flight range, she fears that you have lost your reason, and that you see the weight of the divine beast as being more terrible than your own life. That you will leave her and Tulin behind in the name of protecting them from something you cannot defeat."
The warrior shook his head, but he did not try to mount a defense or a denial. He visibly struggled to find any words at all, and it was only after a great deal of effort that he managed. "I thought that Hoth and I would be able to do it. We came close, I think, very near to bow range. Another few seconds and we would have been able to pierce Meadow's defenses with the bomb arrows, with even one of Meadow's cannons disabled. But that doesn't matter. When Hoth took that hit I thought he had died. I dropped my bow when I was darting after him, and I don't know where it landed. This one? He had it in reserve.
but I caught him as he fell, and carried him back to the village. He wasn't conscious for most of the trip. Do you know what I thought, on the way back?
Cass scowled with his eyes.
I don't suppose it was how difficult this would be to explain to his family.
Tiba chuckled, but it was an unhappy sound.
What a gentle image of me you've managed to develop. Like a character in one of your poems. Ballads?
Cass muttered under his breath. Then, louder, what?
Then? Hoth was the only other person in the village who was willing to try approaching Valmetto, and seeing him injured was going to frighten even the most stalwart of the remainder. All I could think was that I was going to have to go back up alone. Tiba. No, I am not finished.
Tiba set his bow down. For all the world he would not look at Cass again. Now he was facing the village itself, his eyes fixed on the stone spire in the distance.
I spoke to Saki and Tulin again before I left. I can't tell you how much it hurts me to leave them behind. Cass, you have better words. Always have. What? It hurts more than I can say.
Cass said,
You don't have to fight.
Tiba was on his feet now, wheeling on the bard, eyes bright and chest expanding.
Of course I have to fight. Somebody has to try to protect us from that thing.
Cass got to his feet more slowly, dusted the snow from his feathers as he turned to face his friend.
Even if you cannot win? Even if you will almost certainly die and leave your family behind? Deprive your wife of her husband, your son of his father?
His tone was low, still gentle, but he might as well have been jabbing Tiba in the chest with every word.
To what gain, Tiba? Do you wish to be one of the sad fools that are the tragic footnotes of our common histories?
Cass gestured for silence before Tiba could retort.
Do you know that, this morning, I thought about how I might break one of your wings?
There was no answer to that. The bard continued.
You're a fighter, and I'm not, so I couldn't just do it. I thought about bringing a club, hitting you when you least expected it. My knowledge in the combat arts is lacking, but I know just enough about anatomy to hit you with some confidence that I wouldn't be grounding you for the rest of your life. But if I did, it would have been a fair trade.
Zelda could not have said why, but she expected Tiba's reaction to this revelation to be negative. Certainly it gave her complicated enough feelings to contend with, and she was not the intended target of this theoretical assault. Tiba, a taciturn warrior who seemed to care more about the principle of defense than the practical effect of his fighting, certainly seemed the kind to react with ill humor or even violence. But he surprised her by turning his eyes from Cass in shame. What to make of that? But the bowman was not finished, not quite.
So what changed your mind? You aren't carrying a weapon, and I doubt those two girls over there could subdue me on your behalf. Well now,
Cass said, taking the words from Zelda's mouth,
I wouldn't bet on that.
He let that hang in the air, seeing if it would garner a reaction. When it didn't,
believe it or not, Tiba, we're here to help. Kinelli wanted us to convince you not to approach the divine beast. Yes, but that's not the real reason we've come. Saki asked us to get you home safe, and we intend to. But I promised your wife that you would be safe and sound, so I can hardly go injuring you without breaking your promise.
Now Tiba reacted, taking in Cass a glance before turning his eyes to Pyre and Zelda. The weight of his regard was sharp. Sharp like I was always afraid of Lynx being sharp. But Tiba is, actually, weighing me, and sure and quick.
You can't fight, Cass. You're literally not able. And you've brought two flightless Hylians to test their prowess against Valmetto?
His eyes darted towards Zelda again, focused on the Sheikah slate, and then away.
A Hylian and a Sheikah, actually,
Cass said, and he would have said more but Zelda cleared her throat and his eyes lit up as he looked to her. She stepped out onto the deck, and Pae's footsteps behind her were just heavy enough to be audible. Being inside and out of the wind for only those few minutes had been a very soothing experience, one that made stepping back out into the real cold breathtaking. Plumes of condensation rose into the air as she breathed. Something in that cold made her feel clean, and sure, and sharp, and powerful.
I assure you that we will be of help. And though it is only through the use of paragliders, we can move through the air.
Again he looked at the Sheikah slate, but Tiba shook his head with the kind of paternalistic surety that was inherent to men of strength who did not wish to lean on the strength of other people.
I'm sure that you're capable warriors in your own right, but Valmetto is something different. I don't know if Rivali himself would have been able to fight it. Enough.
There was another long silence as Tiba and Paya and Cass all stared at her, one in indignity and one in shock and one in sheer, giddy curiosity. Let them stare, she'd meant it. This was enough. She'd had enough. Enough of this dancing around the possibility of death, or the idea of what people could or couldn't do to protect themselves or the people they loved. How many times had she done this? How many times had she had to prove herself to different people, to be allowed access to the battles that she had to wage to protect the world from an encroaching darkness? It was too much. She said,
"Tell me what we would have to do to prove ourselves suitably capable."
A flash of challenge from Tiba, nearly anger, but something in her own expression must have stilled it because he relented. He gestured with his wing toward the pit in the center of the range.
"There are a number of targets located throughout the range. If you strike all of them within 3 minutes, I would say you would be able to help in the fight against Vomito."
Cass's indignity showed in his response.
3 minutes? Tiba, you are the one Rito capable of that. How would... Please point to the targets,
Zelda said. Tiba grinned with his eyes.
They are hard to miss. Please humor me.
The grin shifted into a blank stare, and then Tiba shrugged and strode to the edge of the platform. Zelda followed him, high at her side, and Cass stood on Tiba's other side. One white wing pointed down into the storm of winds, which ripped the snow flurries in chaotic patterns difficult to follow with the eye. Still, even through the whirling haze of whiteness, it was possible to see the targets, concentric circles of red and white, flashes of color amidst the storm. Around the targets, through the air, something moved and floated and shifted and changed. It was not energy, exactly. Potential, Zelda thought, and decided that the word fit. The air was full of potential. That potential was everywhere, anywhere there was a breeze. But in the heart of the flight range it hummed. She could move that potential. Shape it. Control it. Help me, she thought into the void, and the warm thoughts of her second mother moved around her and through her. Together they reached through the air, and the howl of the wind fell away as they moved that potential together. It was so easy, easier than moving her hand, and Zelda recalled how difficult it had been for Riju. Riju is still learning. Urbosa spoke into her thoughts. I am well practiced. And as I am, so are you. They moved that potential, gathering it, and the places in which the potential had been removed yawned, as if calling to have it returned, pulling against Zelda's will. The air shifted, and she felt it as the hairs on her head began to tingle. Nobody else had noticed. Nobody else could. You can see them, I trust. Tiba's tone was level, very controlled. 3 minutes isn't much time, though. Zelda snapped her fingers. There was a flash of white and a roar. Cass and Tiba jumped, looking to the sky as if searching for the offending cloud. Pai's reaction was much less pronounced. The Shaker woman only nodded to Zelda. She must have seen me snap my fingers. Thunder echoed back from every side of the range. Forgive me, Tiba, Zelda said as the echo faded, as the lightning gave way to the wind again. I'm afraid I got a bit ahead of myself. Did I strike all of the targets? Did you? What? Tiba blinked at her, then turned back to the chasm. Cass joined him. The two must have come to the realization at the same time, because at once they began tracking the formal location of every painted sign. All of them, of course, had been obliterated in a lightning strike. All that remained of them was shards at the bottom of the range, smoking and charred beyond recognition. Zelda didn't need to ask, though she had to admit that she relished the moment of real, genuine confusion that both men were experiencing. With their suspicions confirmed, Cass and Tiba reacted very differently. The former turned back to Zelda with an excited flourish, throwing his wings wide as if to proclaim his amazement, and Tiba stared at her, eyes hard, but he was no longer measuring her. He is measuring himself. Urbosa's thoughts answered the unspoken question. We've only wore that same look once. Cass said, Ask her. Tiba. Tiba looked to him, the turn of his eyes reluctant. I know you disdain my preoccupation with stories, but surely you can see the import when one comes to you. It would be good. No, it would be fulfilling to have him ask her. She could not have said why, but she did not actually like Tiba. Something about his sadness, about his resolution toward duty, reminded her too much of Link. Or, maybe, it reminded her too much of her father. To see that set aside, to see that pride and surety give way to humility, humility directed toward her would be sweet indeed. That is folly, she chided herself. Why do I want him to acknowledge how powerful I am? I am powerful, she responded. I do not need him to acknowledge that for it to be so. Is it so wrong to want to be seen as I am? To be asked simply to do the things that are needed of me? They are needed. Do not be arrogant. I am powerful. That does not make me better. It does not make me more worthy. She was, for a moment, deeply ashamed of her own desire. Something in that shame was familiar. It let her center herself. Before Tiba could speak, she bowed to him, low and deep. She could not see how the two reacted, and did not try to imagine it, keeping her eyes trained on the ground.
Please, Tiba, I wish to see the divine beast restored, and to free the imprisoned spirit of Rivali from a century of captivity. I cannot do this alone. I cannot even reach Far Meadow alone. Will you allow me to help you?
The sound of talons scraping against wood as Tiba walked toward her. Then his answer,
absolutely not.
She winced. I deserve that, I suppose. Still, I can't leave it there.
I hope that you will.
Then he touched her shoulder, urging her to straighten. So she did. He stepped back, then, and looked her in the eyes, not measuring her but looking at her, so intense that his gaze was its own form of communication. Here is a man who is not used to speaking his feelings. What an odd pair he and Saki make.
You will not help me, he said. I will be the one helping you.
As if answering him, Far Meadow's roar filled the entire pass. All four gathered looked to the sky, but still the divine beast circled the air above Rito village, not minding the shape or passing of the lives beneath it. Something in that cry, in the sight of Far Meadow above his home, elicited a nod from Tiba.
I will carry you to Far Meadow.
They had tried to warn Cass against coming along, of course. First Tiba, then Paya, then Zelda, and each in turn had made an excellent argument. He was no great warrior, he was not an especially skilled flyer, while Meadow would find him an easy target, not least because of his vibrant plumage. If Tiba owed his safety to his family, then surely Cass, with his many daughters, owed much more. And these were all quite convincing. If he had been another person, if he had lived another life in another time, then he surely would have been persuaded. He could not deny that he felt a real and terrible fear at the prospect of seeing Far Meadow up close. If Hath had been clipped, then Cass really would present an easy target. But fear meant very little, didn't it? Here was the culmination of an adventure, the climax of a story, and he would be privy to it. His teacher would surely rise from his cairn and haunt Cass's family for generations if the living bard did not make it his mission, his purpose, to witness the legendary battle that was about to take place. How else could he meaningfully commit it to song? How else could he ever expect to convince anyone of the grandiosity of the battle, of the nobility of a young woman who had already died once in service of a world that had spent so long rejecting her? No, he could not be kept away. He had not said those things, of course. Tiba would have probably taken a note from Cass's book and beaten him until he could not fly, and he would have been justified in doing so. So, instead, Cass had presented only a single argument. Zelda wanted Paya along for the battle, and Paya wished to be there to support Zelda. Though he was strong, easily stronger than Cass, Tiba could not carry both women on his back. It was Cass or nothing. Ah, how clever he'd felt when the three had started to argue among each other, about logistics and necessity and danger. When Tiba had argued that Paya didn't need to be present, Cass knew he had won. A single statement, that was all it had taken. And now the wind howled around him in a gale as the updraft of the flight range carried him higher and higher, and his shoulders roared under the strain of supporting Pyre on his back. Pai, who was, in truth, considerably heavier than Cass himself. Who had ever decided that Halians and Shakers shouldn't have hollow bones? It seemed like poor planning, to him.
Are you all right?
Pai's voice in his ear, soft and concerned. Afraid, too, but trying not to show it. Something in her voice made him think of his daughters again.
Oh, don't worry about me. I won't pretend that I could do this forever.
And he was running out of breath just trying to talk while keeping his wings steady, never mind actually beating them to climb.
But I should be able to manage for a while longer. Are you all right? It must feel frigid up here.
To say nothing of the height, some land-bound people were frightened by the sight of the earth far below them, he'd been told.
I am warm enough, thank you.
Her body was very low against his, and she'd pressed her face to the back of his neck to try to reduce the wind resistance, but now she lifted her face and looked ahead.
I think we are drawing close. We are.
The divine beast was a growing blot on the horizon, now some tens of meters lower than the band approaching it. Cass could not quite keep up with Tiber, but that was as well. It was expected that Zelda would be able to do most of the fighting herself. Though, now that he thought of it, Cass had no idea what Zelda combating a divine beast might look like.
Hiyo,
he said.
You've been present at all of the confrontations with the divine beasts, yes? Would you mind telling me what we can expect? It might help me to maneuver more safely in the approach.
She spent a few moments gathering her thoughts.
Usually, the battle will begin on the approach toward the divine beast. In ancient times, the divine beasts were designed to be deployed against the Calamity and its armies, and all of them have defenses that allow them to fight groups of attackers. Distance is, undoubtedly, the best defense against each of them. Then I will be sure to stay back.
Tiba was climbing again. Where did he get the energy for it? Cass beat his wings hard, and only barely matched the rate of ascent.
Once the defenses are breached, Zelda will board the divine beast, and that is usually when the blight, a manifestation of Ganon's power, will reveal itself. The blights are in some ways more dangerous than the beasts themselves, but Zelda has gotten very good at containing them.
A manifestation of Ganon's power. There was an idea, then. Records of what the Calamity looked like was scant, and depictions of it even more so. The number of people who had seen it and lived to tell the tale a century ago numbered less than 10. A blight was surely not the same thing as the Calamity, but it must have carried its own dark majesty. A preface, if he let himself indulge, that might bridge the gap in understanding the Calamity's full terror.
I would like to see that,
he said. He became very aware of the strength of her grip on his shoulders. She was not hurting him, but she could.
No,
she said.
No, you would not.
He nodded. Her grip loosened. She probably didn't realize how hard she'd clenched just now. Like my daughters, indeed. The sound of Vah Meadow's roar, on the ground, was like a bird of prey on an impossible scale, removed, distant, telling of a danger that might close with one before a defense could be mounted. Terrifying, to be sure. It had kept him from sleeping on many nights, to say nothing of the rest of his family. The sound of Vah Meadow's roar, in the sky, was like an apocalypse. The aural shockwave buffeted Cass with such force that it was all he could do to maintain his bearing and keep from losing Pio altogether. His passenger was shouting something, but he could not hear over the divine beast's screech. He hadn't understood, before. He hadn't understood how afraid he should have been. Something in that roar changed that, forced him to confront his smallness. He fought through the fear, gathered himself as the screech subsided, shouted over his shoulder. What did you say?
Something is wrong. It's coming.
He had been avoiding looking at Vah Meadow. A fear response, perhaps. He forced himself to look now, and instantly regretted it. A cloud rose from the divine beast's back, black in its body and lit by the whirling luminescent purples and reds of shifting fire and lightning as he watched. It is not a cloud. It is a body. I am seeing the body of the blight. The blight rose above the divine beast, abandoning its pose, twisting and turning in the air, condensing and shifting and transforming. It howled, and that howl was quieter than the roar of Vah Meadow, but more terrible still. It was focused. It was coming for them. He could see as its bearing shifted, as the storm snaked through the air like an echo of the Calamity itself. Pyre rolled off of his back. He shouted, terrified that he had dropped her, prepared to dive in to catch her, and then her paraglider was open, and the updraft pulled her higher than he was. She was not looking at him. He saw her eyes were fixed on the cloud. And, perhaps, on Zelda. The blight condensed. He could not see the form that it took in the air, but he knew that it was an echo of Ganon, a ruiner of nations. He saw that it had wings. Then he saw the light of dawn roaring to life on Tiba's back. He nearly looked away, but forced his eyes to remain there fixed as Zelda leapt into the open sky. She did not use her paraglider. She was enshrouded in light. There was a sound, as consuming as Ganon's roar. It took a moment for him to recognize it, and when he did he had to fight down his thrill. The air was filled with the beating of mighty wings. End of chapter.